If people don't respect you, it's not because you lack value. It's because you've made yourself too easy to have, too available, too responsive, too predictable. You reply the moment they text. You show up the moment they call. You make it clear, without ever saying it, that access to you is never a problem. And that's exactly where the problem begins, because the human mind doesn't reward what is always there. It adjusts to it. It normalizes it. And then it starts to ignore it, not intentionally, not consciously, but inevitably. This is the part no one explains to you. Familiarity without scarcity does not create value. It creates invisibility. At first, everything feels normal. Conversations flow, people respond, you feel included, but slowly, quietly, something shifts. Replies take longer, plans become uncertain, and your presence becomes optional. And you start asking yourself, what changed? Nothing changed. You just revealed something. That can't be unseen. You revealed your price, and it was zero. Because when people know they can reach you anytime, they stop feeling the need to. When there is no resistance, there is no anticipation. When there is no anticipation, there is no value. Understand this clearly. The available man gets attention, but the unavailable one gets respect. And attention is temporary. Respect controls behavior. That's why the one who is always present is often the one least considered. Not because they lack substance, but because they lack scarcity. And scarcity is what creates importance. If this makes you uncomfortable, good, because most people will hear this and immediately reject it. And they'll go back to replying instantly. Being everywhere, being easy, and they'll stay exactly where they are. But if something in you is starting to recognize this, if you can feel the shift already, then you're not here by accident. Subscribe. Because what you're about to understand with is not about being liked. It's about being valued. You were taught a game that was never designed to give you power. From the beginning, the rules sounded harmless. Be kind, be available, be easy to work with, respond quickly, don't make people wait. And you followed those rules because they made you accepted. People liked you, people felt comfortable around you. You became the person others could rely on. And for a while, that felt like value. But what you didn't see was what those rules were quietly doing to your position. And because acceptance is not the same as respect, and comfort is not the same as importance. The more available you became, the more predictable you became. And predictability has a hidden cost. When people can anticipate you completely, they stop paying attention to you. There's no tension, no uncertainty, no reason to prioritize you. You become part of the background, always there, always reachable, always expected, and what is expected is rarely valued. This is the shift most people never notice. They think they're building relationships, but they're actually lowering their perceived worth. Because in every social dynamic there is an invisible structure. The one who needs to be liked moves toward others. The one who doesn't, others move toward them, and without realizing it, you were trained to move, to respond, to adjust, and to accommodate, every time. You were taught to remove friction, to make things smooth, to make things easy, but friction is not the enemy. Friction is what creates attention. It forces people to pause, to think, to consider. Without friction, there is no weight, and without weight, there is no value. Think about it. The person who says yes to everything is never the one people chase. They are the one people assume. Assume they'll be there. Assume they'll respond. Assume they'll agree. And assumptions won't kill importance. Because importance is created when something is not guaranteed. You don't become valuable by being everywhere. You become valuable when your presence is limited. When people are not sure if they will get your time. When access to you feels uncertain, that uncertainty creates attention, and attention creates value. But you were never taught that. You were taught to be consistent, to be reliable, to be always available, and in doing so, you became easy. And what is easy to have is easy to ignore. That's the game you were taught, and now you're starting to see it. Because once you understand this, you can't go back to playing it the same way. Value is not what you are. It's not your effort, not your intentions, not even your actual ability. Value is what people believe it costs to get you. And that belief has very little to do with reality. It's built on perception. Two people can offer the same thing, the same ideas, the same time, the same energy. One is overlooked, the other is pursued. Not because one is better, because one feels rare and the other feels easy. This is the uncomfortable truth. People don't calculate your value logically, and they respond to it emotionally. And emotion follows a simple pattern. What feels limited feels important. What feels unlimited feels replaceable. If people know they can reach you any time, they stop feeling urgency. If there's no urgency, there's no priority. And if there's no priority, there's no respect. This is how value quietly disappears, not because you changed, but because the perception around you did. You see this everywhere. The person who is always available is often the one people delay responding to, the one who replies instantly, waits the longest for a reply, not because they're less important, because they've removed all tension, and tension is what holds attention. Without it, interaction becomes casual, and what is casual is never taken seriously. Understand this carefully. Value is created in the gap between access and uncertainty. When people are not sure if they will get your time, they start to value it. When your presence is not guaranteed, it becomes something to secure. And the moment something needs to be secured, it becomes important. But when access is constant, certainty replaces desire. There's no need to act, no reason to invest, because the mind assumes it will always be there. And what is assumed is rarely protected. This is why being good is not enough. This is why effort alone doesn't create value, because effort without positioning is invisible. You can give more, do more, be more. But if the perception remains the same, your value doesn't change. That's the trap. Most people try to increase value by increasing output, but real value isn't built that way. And it's built by controlling how accessible you are. Because access is the signal people use to measure importance, not consciously but consistently. And once that signal is set, everything else follows. So understand this shift. You don't become valuable by proving more. You become valuable by being less available, not absent, not distant for no reason, but controlled, deliberate, measured. Because the moment people feel they can lose access to you, they start treating you differently. They respond faster, they pay more attention, they invest more effort. Not because you changed, because the perception of your value did. And in this game, perception is everything. No one sat down and made a decision to undervalue you. There was no meeting, no moment where they said, "You're not important." It didn't happen like that. It happened slowly, silently, through patterns you repeated without thinking. Every time you replied instantly, you reinforced a signal. Every time you made yourself available, you confirmed it. Every time you adjusted your time to fit theirs, you trained them. Not with words, with behavior, because people don't learn how to treat you from what you say. They learn it from what you allow consistently. And consistency is what builds perception. At first, your availability feels like value. You're responsive, reliable, easy to deal with. People appreciate it. But appreciation is temporary. Perception is permanent. And over time, something shifts. Your fast replies become expected. Your presence becomes assumed. Your effort becomes invisible. Because what repeats loses impact. What is always there stops being noticed. This is where most people get confused. They think, I've done everything right. I've been present, I've been supportive, I've given my time. And they have, but they've also done something else. They removed the cost of access. They made it clear, you don't need to earn this. And when something doesn't need to be earned, it doesn't get respected. That's the rule. Not moral, not fair, but real. So what happens next is predictable. Replies slow down. Plans become flexible. Your time becomes negotiable, not because you changed. Because the value signal changed, you lowered the resistance. And resistance is what creates weight. Without resistance, there is no effort. Without effort, there is no investment. And without investment, there is no attachment. You didn't lose their respect. You never required it. That's the part most people avoid facing. They think they were ignored. But in reality, they made ignoring them easy. Read that again. Because this is where everything turns. They didn't wake up and decide to deprioritize you. They followed the pattern you set. You showed them, I'm always here. I'll always respond. I'll adjust. And they adjusted too, in their favor. This is how silent hierarchies are formed. The one who waits holds position. The one who reacts lowers it. And you reacted, not because you were weak, because you were conditioned to believe that being available creates value. But availability without limits creates the opposite. It creates familiarity. And familiarity without scarcity creates indifference. So understand this clearly. This is not about blame. It's about awareness. Because once you see it, you stop repeating it. You stop overgiving. You stop over-responding. You stop making access effortless. And when that changes, their behavior changes. Not immediately, but inevitably. Because the moment you raise the cost of access, you raise your perceived value. And for the first time, they start treating you based on what it takes to reach you, not what you were giving away for free. Powerful people don't become valuable by doing more. They become valuable by controlling access. That's the difference most people never understand. They think value comes from visibility, from being present everywhere, from responding quickly and proving their worth. But power doesn't operate that way. Power is not built through exposure. It is built through restriction. Watch carefully. People with real influence don't rush to respond. They don't explain themselves endlessly. They don't try to be everywhere at once. And they move differently, measured, deliberate, controlled. Not because they're arrogant, because they understand something fundamental. The more accessible you are, the less valuable you appear. So they create distance, not emotional distance, strategic distance. They don't remove themselves completely, they just remove certainty. You're not sure when they'll respond, you're not sure how much access you have, you're not sure how available they are. And that uncertainty creates attention. Because the mind fills gaps, it wonders, it anticipates, it leans in. That's how value is created, not by giving everything, but by controlling what is given and when. Notice something else. Powerful people don't over-communicate. They don't feel the need to explain every detail. They don't rush to clarify everything. They say less. And then because they say less, what they do say carries weight. Silence becomes part of their presence. And silence is powerful. Because silence creates space. And in that space, modern people project importance. They assume there is depth. They assume there is control. They assume there is value, not because it was proven, because it was felt. This is where most people fail. They try to prove their value constantly. They overshare, they over-explain, they over-deliver, and in doing so, they remove the mystery that creates interest. Because when everything is visible, nothing feels special. But when something is partially hidden, it becomes intriguing. And intrigue pulls people in. Powerful people understand this instinctively. They don't flood others with access. They create selective exposure. You see enough to be interested, but not enough to feel you fully have them. That balance is where value lives, and it's not accidental, it's intentional. Every delay, every pause, every measured response is part of positioning, because positioning determines perception, and perception determines value, so they don't ask for attention, they don't chase relevance, they don't try to be liked, they control their presence in a way that makes others adjust. And when others adjust, the hierarchy is clear. The one who is harder to reach is the one who is valued more, not always because they are better, but because they are positioned better. That's the difference, and once you understand this, you stop trying to increase your value by doing more and start increasing it by being less available, not absent, not distant without reason, but controlled, intentional, expensive, because that's how power is created, not through noise, but through precision. Understanding the idea is not enough, because most people will hear this, agree with it, and then go back to behaving the same way. Still replying instantly, still over-explaining, still making themselves easy. And nothing changes because value is not built through awareness, it's built through behavior. So this is where it shifts, from understanding to execution. Start with the simplest move. Stop being instantly available, not as a trick, not to play games, but to break the pattern you've created. Right now, people expect you to respond fast. That expectation is your problem because expectation removes value, so disrupt it. Pause before replying. Let time pass. Let there be space. Not too much, just enough to introduce uncertainty. Because uncertainty creates attention, and attention creates value. Next, stop over-explaining yourself. This is one of the biggest ways people make themselves cheap. They clarify everything. They justify everything. They fill every silence. And in doing so, they remove all weight from their words because when everything is explained, nothing feels important. Say less. Be clear but not excessive. Let people think. Let them interpret because when people think, they invest. And what people invest in, they respect. Then, control what you give, and when you give it. You don't need to reveal everything immediately. You don't need to solve every problem right away. You don't need to give full access to your time and attention. Make it gradual, layered. Let people earn more access over time. Because access that is earned is valued. Access that is given freely is ignored. And finally, protect your time like it has a price. Because it does. You've just been acting like it doesn't. Every time you drop what you're doing to respond, every time you prioritize others without thinking, you signal something. My time is flexible. My time is available. My time is not scarce. And scarcity is what creates value. So start treating your time differently, not emotionally, strategically. Decide when you respond. Decide where your attention goes. Decide who gets access. Because the moment you become selective, everything changes. People notice the delay. They notice the shift. They feel the difference. And when they feel that difference, they adjust. They respond faster. They become more attentive. They take you more seriously. Not because you asked them to. Because the cost of access increased. That's the shift. You don't demand respect. You create the conditions where respect becomes the only response. But this only works if it becomes consistent, not something you do once, something you maintain. Because value is not built in one action. It's built in repeated signals. And once those signals change, so does your position, so does their behavior, and so does your value. You don't become expensive by saying it. You become expensive by acting like access to you has a cost. And once people feel that cost, they stop treating you like something that's free. This is where most people fail. Not because they don't understand the idea, but because they try to use it like a technique, a small adjustment, a temporary behavior, something they switch on. and off. And it never works, because this is not a tactic, it's an identity shift. You don't become expensive by delaying a few replies. You become expensive when your entire behavior reflects one principle. Access to you is not automatic. That principle has to be real, not performed. Because people can feel the difference. They can sense when you're acting and when you've changed. If you're still internally seeking approval, your behavior will expose it. You'll delay a reply, but feel the urge to respond. You'll say less, but feel the need to explain more. You'll create distance, but try to fix it quickly. And that inconsistency destroys the signal, because value is not built on occasional control, it's built on consistent positioning. So this is where the shift happens. You stop trying to be liked, not in a dramatic way, not in a hostile way, but in a quiet internal decision. I don't need everyone to approve of me. And when that pressure disappears, your behavior changes naturally. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-giving. You stop adjusting yourself constantly. You become selective, not reactive, not desperate, not available by default. And that selectivity creates something powerful, calm, a calm presence, a calm response, a calm pace. You're no longer rushing to reply, no longer trying to prove anything, no longer filling every silence. Because you're not operating from lack, you're operating from control. And control is what people feel, not what you say. This is why powerful individuals don't need to announce their value. Their behavior communicates it. The way they pause, the way they respond, the way they don't rush. Yet all of it signals one thing. There is no urgency here. And because there is no urgency, there is no need to prove. That's what makes them different. They don't chase attention. They don't compete for presence. They decide when to engage. And when you reach that point, you stop being easy. Not because you're trying to be difficult, but because your standards changed. Your time matters. Your attention matters. Your presence matters. And not everyone gets it. That's the identity. Not loud, not aggressive, not arrogant, just rare. And rarity creates tension. Tension creates interest. Interest creates value. But this only works when it becomes who you are. Not something you apply, but something you embody. Because once you truly shift, you don't have to think about being expensive. You don't have to remember to delay replies. You don't have to force yourself to say less. It happens naturally. Because your internal position changed. And when that changes, everything else follows. You don't need to convince people of your value. They feel it in how little access they have to you. And that feeling is what changes how they treat you. Understand this clearly, and don't soften it. No one reduced your value. You did. Not deliberately, not with bad intentions, but with repeated behavior that made access to you feel effortless. You were always there, always ready, always responding, and over time, that consistency sent a signal. There is no cost here, and when there is no cost, there is no pressure to value it. This is where everything changes, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. In every delayed reply you've received, every time you were overlooked, every moment someone treated your time casually. It wasn't random. It was the natural result of the position you created. You made yourself easy. And ease removed importance. But here's the shift. The moment you reduce access, you increase value. The moment you create space, you create tension. And tension forces attention. People begin to notice again. They respond faster. They think more. They become aware of your absence. Not because you changed your worth, because you changed the conditions around it. That's the game. Not improving what you are, but controlling how you are perceived. And perception is what drives behavior. So when you stop being constantly available, you don't lose people, you filter them. The ones who only valued convenience fall away. And the ones who recognize value adjust. They respect your time. They respond differently. They invest more. Because now, there is something to lose, and people only protect what they feel they could lose. That's why this matters. Not for ego, not for control, but for position. Because position determines everything. How people speak to you, how they prioritize you, how they treat your presence. And that position is not given, it's built quietly, consistently, deliberately. So remember this without exception. You don't become valuable by giving more. You become valuable by making access to you cost something, time, patience, attention. And once that cost exists, everything changes, the dynamic shifts. You are no longer the one waiting. You are the one being waited for. You are no longer the one explaining. You are the one being understood. You are no longer the one chasing. You are the one being considered. That's the transformation. Not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. Most people will hear this and go back to their habits. Back to being available, back to being easy, back to being overlooked. But if you apply this consistently, then you separate yourself immediately because very few people have the discipline to control their own access. Subscribe, because this is how power is built, not through effort alone, not through constant presence, but through controlled scarcity, quiet, calculated, and impossible to ignore.